A warm welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week on the program, the remains of former American President Jimmy Carter returned to his hometown of Plains, Georgia after a state funeral in Washington, D.C. Carter was America's 39th president, serving only one term from 1977 to 1981. He died at the age of 100. Carter was the first American president to visit Nigeria. He reciprocated a visit by then head of state General Olusegun Obasanjo in March to April of 1978. Then General Obasanjo had visited Washington in October 1977 before Carter's visit. Obasanjo's visit was the first of a Nigerian leader to the U.S. since independence, while Carter's was the first ever state visit of a U.S. leader to a sub-Saharan African country. The visits resulted in the Nigerian-U.S. Manpower Training Agreement, under which thousands of Nigerians would receive technical training in the U.S., and agreements to set up 4 joint working groups on investments in trade, technology, agriculture, and rural development and education. In 1977, the Nigerian government signed 2 large contracts with American firms for the planning of its new capital in Abuja. Military assistance also increased, whereas U.S. sales of military equipment to Nigeria had amounted to only about $12.6 million between 1950 and 1976. In 1977, the U.S. approved $45.5 million in such sales. A week-long activity was held ahead of Carter's funeral on Friday. Over at the Washington National Cathedral in Washington, where the state funeral took place, hundreds of mourners, including all 5 living current and former U.S. presidents, attended.
They were small-town people who never forgot who they were and where they were from, no matter what happened in their lives. But I recognize that we are not here because he was just a regular guy. As you've heard from the other speakers, his political life and his presidency for me was not just ahead of its time, it was prophetic. He had the courage and strength to stick to his principles even when they were politically unpopular. As governor of Georgia half a century ago, he preached an end to racial discrimination and an end to mass incarceration. As president in the 1970s, as you've heard, he protected more land than any other president in history. Maybe this is unbelievable to you, but in my 49 years, I never perceived a difference between his public face and his private one. He was the same person no matter who he was with or where he was. And for me, that's the definition of integrity.
Fellow Democratic President Joe Biden eulogized the 39th president who died on December 29th, saying Carter's life taught him the strength of character is more than title or the power we hold.
Jimmy Carter's friendship taught me, and through his life taught me, the strength of character is more than title or the power we hold. We have an obligation to give hate no safe harbor, and to stand up to what my dad used to say is the greatest sin of all, the abuse of power. That's not about being perfect, because none of us are perfect. We're all fallible, but it's about asking ourselves, are we striving to do things, the right things? What values? What are the values that animate our spirit? Do we operate from fear or hope, ego or generosity? Do we show grace? Do we keep the faith when it's most tested? Throughout his life, he showed us what it means to be a practitioner of good works and a good and faithful servant of God and of the people. And today, many think he was from a bygone era, but in reality, he saw well into the future.
Back here in Nigeria, former President Chief Olusegun Obasanjo held a funeral for the late Jimmy Carter at the Chapel of Christ the Glorious King. Chief Obasanjo attended the funeral service alongside his family members, friends, and associates.
It's a funeral service in honor of the late President of the United States of America, Jimmy Carter. Former President Olusegun Obasanjo, his wife, family members, friends, associates, and clergymen are here at the Chapel of Christ the Glorious King in Abeokuta. Though about 5,000 miles away from where he lived and died, the memories of the life and times of the late U.S. President comes alive as the President of the Nigeria Baptist Convention, Reverend Israel Adelani Akonji, asked leaders to emulate the virtues of selfless service that Mr. Carter lived and died for.
Jimmy Carter, he knew the way, he knew God, he showed the way, he was a great teacher of the Word of God, and he went the way himself. He was a lover of his wife, his family, and a lover of people to the ends of the world. He showed himself as an inclusive person. He fought for human rights. He stood for human rights of all people. That's the man, Jimmy Carter himself.
Former President Obasanjo, the convener of the funeral service, describes his late friend as a humanist, man of God, and highlights some of the qualities which endeared him to the late U.S. President.
He grew up under a father and mother who were disciplinarian, who instilled in him a sense of discipline, morality, hard work, integrity, kindness, and humility, compassion for the poor, and strong belief in God.
Chief Obasanjo goes on to commend the former U.S. President for saving his life during General Sani Abacha's military era as the head of state of Nigeria.
On President Carter's visit to Nigeria, he got Abacha to agree to take me from detention to house arrest on my farm. But that did not last for too long. Many other friends and leaders intervened, but President Carter was the only non-African leader, according to my information, that paid a visit to Abacha solely to plead for my relief.
The late Jimmy Carter was the longest-lived U.S. president and the first to reach 100 years of age. The 39th President of the United States of America was born on October 1st, 1924, and died on December 29th, 2024.
Now let's check in on other discussions in diplomatic circles.
The EU Foreign Policy Chief, Kaja Kallas, says any European decision to ease sanctions will be conditional on the new Syrian administration's approach to governing, which must include different groups, women, and no radicalization. SJE was speaking at a Syria summit in Saudi Arabian capital Riyadh, adding that depending on the country's development, the EU would either take the next steps or move back on the decision. The conference, which held on Sunday, is the first of such meetings of Western and regional leaders hosted by regional heavyweights Saudi Arabia since Assad's ouster, and comes as Damascus urges the West to lift sanctions to help international funding flow more freely.
What we start from is, of course, those sanctions that are hindering the build-up of a country. access to banking services and all these things. But of course, it has to be a cascade with the conditions. So if we see the developments going to the right direction, we are ready to do the next steps. But also, it has to have a fallback position. If we see that it's not going to the right direction, then we can also move back on this. Well, first, of course, is the inclusivity of the government and really the process in this regard. We know in Syria there are a lot of different groups, so it has to include all those groups. We also want to see no radicalization. We want to see inclusiveness of women also in the process. So these are the things that we are going to assess.
Canadian residents say U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's remarks about turning their country into a state in the United States is ridiculous. Trump had suggested he may use economic force to bring Canada into the United States when speaking to the media on January 7th, which stirred controversy. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, commenting on the issue, said the comments are just a distraction from the consequences of Trump's tariff threats. Canadian residents made known their thoughts on the matter.
I feel that it's ridiculous. Him even suggesting such a thing is ridiculous, and it's never going to happen. And if Trump decides to impose any kind of economic tariffs, Canada does have a stance to in turn impose the same tariffs, and then it'll just end up being some sort of tariff war. I don't feel that a war with us is ever going to happen with the United States. I don't even think the United States people would support that. I do feel that Trump's comments so far, but they are just comments. He is known to throw things out wildly all of the time. I would prefer to wait to see what kind of actions he's planning on taking towards us. And I feel that some of our leaders, not the head of our country, but at least our provincial leaders, are more than prepared to meet whatever tariff demands he's going to put on our country. Because in the end, we have always worked together. We've done trade with each other since the beginning of time. The U.S. enjoys coming up here. We enjoy buying their products. If he wants to start a fight, they're going to suffer as much as we do.
U.S. President Joe Biden has awarded Pope Francis the Presidential Medal of Freedom with distinction, the nation's highest civilian honor. It is the first time during his 4 seasons in office that Biden has awarded a medal with distinction. The White House says Biden spoke by phone with the Pope on Saturday and expressed deep regret that he was unable to visit Rome and the Vatican City. The two leaders discussed efforts to advance peace around the world, including the Pope's work to alleviate suffering for vulnerable communities. The Presidential Medal of Freedom is presented to individuals who have made exemplary contributions to the prosperity, values, or security of the U.S., world peace, or other significant societal, public, or private endeavors. Spanish Coast Guards have rescued 62 migrants off the coast of Canary Islands. Emergency services waiting for the migrants at Aguinguen port in Gran Canaria helped a Bambi migrant and another minor disembark the orange rescue vessel. The migrants were attended to by members of the Red Cross in a tent installed at the port. The 7 Spanish islands off northwestern Africa's Atlantic coast are struggling to absorb a surge in irregular migrants, mainly from Mali, Senegal, and Morocco. The archipelago hit an all-time annual high for a second year in a row, with 46,000 arrivals in 2024, constituting 73% of the irregular migration to Spain. Protesters on Saturday took to the streets of Tel Aviv, Israel, to call for an end to the war in Gaza and immediate release of hostages. Families of hostages held by Hamas for 15 months carried protesters with photos of their loved ones and chanted slogans. Earlier on Saturday, an Israeli official said some progress had been made in the indirect talks between Israel and Palestinian militant group Hamas, mediated by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States to reach a deal in Gaza. The mediators are making renewed efforts to reach a deal to halt the fighting in the enclave and free the remaining Israeli hostages held there before U.S. President-elect Trump takes office on January 20th. A deal would also involve the release of some Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails.
Our hostages are enduring endless, unspeakable torture. IDF soldiers are losing their lives in vain, and still Netanyahu does not commit to ending the war. We hereby call upon the public to join us in the streets and demand that all our hostages be returned and the war in Gaza be ended.
Like every Saturday night, we gather here, all the families and our supporters. We're coming here to cry for a deal, and I have to say that our optimism goes up a bit tonight. We heard that the head of the Mossad is going to Doha. We know that elected President Trump's representative has come to Israel, and we cannot lose hope. For us, any improvement is bringing so much hope. It's critical that they will be brought back home immediately, as soon as possible. We have to make sure it's happening this week.
The wildfires in Los Angeles, California, in the United States have claimed 16 lives, as well as more than 30,000 acres of land and more than 10,000 buildings, the most destructive wildfires in the history of the state. The frequent occurrence of wildfires worldwide has raised concern about climate change, making them worse. California Governor Gavin Newsom says there's no longer a fire season in California. It is year-round in the state. Now, this brings to mind the issue of climate change and warming global temperatures, evident in the occurrence of wildfires, not only in the United States, but in Europe as well. Temperatures have also been rising in Africa, resulting in drought and floods. The National Centers for Environmental Information says the year 2024 was the warmest year since global records began in 1850 at 1.29 degrees Celsius, above the 20th century average of 13.9 degrees Celsius. According to the European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service, the planet is warming to record-breaking levels. It also says global temperatures exceeded pre-industrial levels by 1.5 degrees Celsius. The climate crisis, it says, is pushing a global temperatures never before experienced by modern humans. It kind of corroborates a NASA report released on Friday, indicating that 2024 was the hottest year on record, with global surface temperatures pegged at 1.2 degrees Celsius higher than the agency's 20th century standard, spurred on by the greenhouse gas-driven climate change. NASA Senior Climate Advisor Dr. Catherine Calvin says the rise in temperatures are leading to increased impacts to people around the world, from flooding to droughts and extreme heat events.
So the one of the drivers of the trend we're seeing towards warmer temperature, the primary driver is an increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so how much warmer it gets in the future depends on future emissions of greenhouse gases. As long as the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere continue to rise, we will see an increasing trend towards warmer world. That doesn't mean that every year will be record breaking, because still things like El Nino and La Nina may lead to slightly cooler years on occasion. But with increasing levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we'll see an increasing trend towards a warmer world. And that warmer world brings with it an increase in impacts. So what we're seeing is impacts from increasing temperatures around the world, and they go beyond just changes in temperature that impact people, but the impacts we see depend on where you live. So in coastal regions, there's sea level rise that's affecting storm surge and coastal flooding. We're seeing extreme heat events across the country. We see changes in the water cycle, which means more heavy precipitation events, and in some regions, more droughts. So the impacts, we're experiencing them now. We understand that they will continue to increase in the future with future warming, but what specific impacts you feel depends on where you live. Yeah, so the fires in LA are truly devastating, and my thoughts are with everyone in LA right now. And I think the focus is on containing the fire and helping the people that are there. But as scientists, we do try to understand fires and how they're changing so that we can help provide that information to prepare and plan for the future. Fires are very complex, and there's multiple factors that contribute, and we're still learning about these fires. But in general, what we know is that climate change does increase the risk and severity of fires. For example, climate change can increase fuel for fires, the amount of dry vegetation that can catch on fire. Yes, we do. Scientists both at NASA and around the world are studying links between a warming planet and hurricanes. And some of what we see is that climate change tends to lead towards a higher proportion of strong storms, so higher maximum wind speeds and more water associated with it, so more rainfall and precipitation that is coming from hurricanes. And a lot of that precipitation is truly damaging, particularly in the hurricanes we saw this year. We do try to better understand hurricanes. Our sister agency, NOAA, has the responsibility of forecasting them, but we do work to do research on hurricanes. And so we have some satellite mission called Tropics that's helping us better understand how hurricanes evolve very quickly so that we can help hurricane forecasters better predict them in the future. So for the temperature update that we released today, we're relying on surface weather observations. So these come from thousands of surface weather stations on land, as well as millions of observations in total, including the ships and buoy observations that we have. So it's measuring the temperature at the surface, and we have all of these different point sources of that information, and we can use that to construct regional and global average temperature and look at that and how it changes over time. There are other ways to measure temperature. So we also have the ability to measure temperature from satellites. We have a shorter record of that because the satellite era doesn't go back as far as the surface weather era. But when we compare the record over the satellite era with the surface measurements that we see the same trends and the same move towards warmer and warmer world.
Need further proof about the rising global temperatures? The World Meteorological Organization on Friday said 2024 was the hottest year on record, and that the last 10 years have all been in the top 10 hottest years on record. Governments promised under the 2015 Paris Agreement to try to prevent the average temperature rise exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius. But the WMO says the 2024 record does not breach the Paris target, which relies on longer-term averages.
Today, WMO confirms that 2024 is the warmest year on record, coming in at about 1.55 degrees above pre-industrial levels. This is kind of part of a number of findings that are concerning with regard to temperature, including that the past 10 years, from 2015 to 2024, are the 10 warmest years on record. And we saw exceptional temperatures in the ocean, the highest ever recorded by humans. It's really clear that, as the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has said, climate change, including increased heat, extended droughts, and a thirsty atmosphere, has been a key driver in the increased risk and extent of wildfires. So, I think it's clear that many scientific agencies are pointing to the connection between these types of events and climate change. We have set up a group to look at the way we define 1.5 because, we're very clear that 1 year surpassing the 1.5 degree level does not constitute a breach of the Paris Agreement. But whether we use a 20-year time frame or a 10-year rolling time frame, matters with regard to how we kind of define surpassing 1.5. And right now there is not currently an mutually agreed definition. So we've pulled together some scientists to kind of look at it. The interesting thing, though, is every methodology that they're looking at has us at about 1.3 degrees of warming above pre-industrial levels. If we pass 1.5 degrees, then of course coming back below that temperature is a high priority, and that's the definition of overshoot. But in terms of whether we're there or not, I don't think, WMO doesn't have a perspective on, the certainty with which we will pass 1.5 degrees according to the definition we use of kind of multi-decadal averages. And we are certainly not of the view that we're doomed to an overshoot scenario at this point. The trend, both of increasing temperatures and of insufficient reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, is a real cause for concern. And we just, have to turn both of these trends in the right direction if we're going to address the long-term effects of climate change.
The exact causes of the California fires, which began last Tuesday, remain unknown and are still under investigation. And that's Diplomatic Channel this week. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.